Hey there, welcome into Unpaid Interns. I'm Griffin Epstein. It's the first day of March, and we are back with another exciting episode. Really excited to have another great guest on. Dave Flemming joins me today. I think the perfect guest for the start of March. He does college basketball and college football broadcasting for ESPN, but baseball is also right around the corner, and he has been one of the play-by-play broadcasters for the San Francisco Giants for the past now 17 years. Dave, it is really great to have you on today.
Hi, Griffin. Nice to be with you. Thanks for asking me.
And Dave, I'll start with this. It's been almost a year now since the pandemic started and has obviously changed broadcasting. What's been the experience like for you as a broadcaster during this past year?
Well, I've been probably like everybody else, happy to have any sort of sense of normalcy, any part of our lives that can kind of be the way that they were or are supposed to be, has been a welcome thing. So I've been able to do games, which has been great. Those first couple months when I was doing nothing were the most challenging part of this last year. But I'm talking to you from the seat where I sit and do most of my games these days, and that's been strange. I don't travel as much. I've done a few in-person events, but almost everything has been from this little home studio that ESPN created for me. Baseball will be a little different, but for the most part, baseball last season we didn't travel at all. We did every game from our home ballpark, so not from the house, but from the home ballpark. Didn't travel with the team at all. So professionally, that's been the biggest difference, is figuring out how to do games from home, what works, what doesn't work, what the best way to do it is. Not easy. I do think we've gotten better at it, which I say is sort of a double-edged thing. I mean, I'm glad we've gotten better at it. I don't want to be so good at it that this is the way we do it forever, but we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, specifically with college basketball and football, I know you've done a lot from home, and typically your color analyst is also at a home studio, maybe could be thousands of miles away from you. What's been that challenge like working with ESPN and having, your color analyst might be 1,000 miles away, the broadcast might be 1,000 miles away. How is that all working with your broadcasting prep and then in game as well?
Yeah, most of the time. Well, if we're working from home, we're all separated anyway. But truly, different time zones. Even just setting up our meetings and what time we go on the air. Everybody's accounting for now. Wait, is that Eastern time, Pacific time? What are we talking about here? That is one of the biggest challenges of doing these remote games is when I'm live in person with somebody, we use a lot of nonverbal cues. I might reach over and tap who I'm working with, or give a hand signal, or slip a note, or whatever. There are lots of different ways that I can communicate with that person off the air, but in real time. It's much harder to do that here. We have a little Zoom set up so I can see who I'm working with in theory, but they're not always paying attention to me. I'm not always paying attention to them. It's a small little box as a part of our screen that has all kinds of different stuff. So that is definitely one of the biggest challenges, is the inability to read one another, to sort of see when that person is finishing up their thought. That's hard. And I would say my reaction to it has been that I have simplified my broadcast. I mean, I say less. Uh, I just kind of try to talk less than I would, and maybe that's a good thing overall. But I simplify big time. I just do, and I feel like we almost have to. While we're doing it this way, you got to kind of keep it simple.
I want to ask you a little bit more about the college basketball season. It's obviously been a unique year, not just because of the pandemic, but a lot of the traditional blue bloods have struggled. What's been your impressions of the college basketball season, broadcasting it? I know you've done a lot of Big Ten games. And what's kind of your expectations now that we're in March?
I think it's been a year where, I mean, you're right. Some of the traditional powerhouse programs have struggled, but I think the bigger picture is, to me, is that team to team, there's been a much different response to how to deal with the stresses and the emotions on these young people of playing in this strange world and strange year. And maybe part of that is the teams that start off well and have success get that carrot in front of them of, hey, this is working. This is fine. This is worth all the sacrifices we're making. The teams that struggle at the beginning, maybe, in the back of your mind, even if it's subconsciously, you start to think, what are we doing here? And that's just me speculating. We've talked to some players, and I think they'll talk a little bit about that. But I think that's a real phenomenon where, if things aren't going well at night, you fall asleep and you go, what are we doing here? Whereas the teams that are playing at such a high level and feel like, hey, we can win a conference, we can win a national championship, to them, yeah, we're all these sacrifices are worth it. So I think that's why you're seeing, in a way, a stratification of the sport, maybe even more so than in a normal year. And I also think you're seeing ups and downs. Wild swings in performance have been, to me, more characteristic of this season. Now, they're college athletes, so I think you always get the up and down. It's not predictable when you're dealing with people who are 18, 20 years old. But I think this year more than ever, if there was a scare about a positive test, or the travel was different than usual, the schedule's been interrupted and no routines, I think that has lent itself to less consistency overall.
It's certainly been an interesting season. You mentioned teams that have had a lot of success. I know you've done a lot of Gonzaga games. There's certainly a team that's had plenty of success now, the last remaining undefeated in the land. Are they as good as people say they are? I know, that you've been doing a lot of their late 10 p.m. games. People on the East Coast aren't watching them. Are they the number one overall seed, and what makes them such a strong team?
Yeah, I think there are three teams that are better than everybody else, and Gonzaga is one of them. And I do think that they are the best team, but that doesn't mean that they can't be beaten. It certainly doesn't mean that. What makes Gonzaga good? So Gonzaga has sort of built its program on experience and upperclassmen and player development, and that has changed a little bit with Jalen Suggs. Now, Jalen Suggs is a just remarkably talented point guard who is a one and done player. Really, the first true Gonzaga's had a player or two who have left after a year to go to the NBA, but this is the first player who came to Gonzaga as a one and done. I'm here for 1 year and then I'm going to play in the league, and it's worked out beautifully for them. I think there was a little apprehension, there was celebration with Gonzaga's program. Hey, we can get this guy who everybody wanted. But then there was like, man, we haven't done this before. Is this going to work for our culture, our program? And it really has. So to me, this year's team, Gonzaga has 4 players who you could make a case are among the top 15 players in college basketball. So they're a star-studded team. They're not particularly deep. Does that matter in the NCAA tournament? If you stay out of foul trouble and nobody gets hurt, I don't think it matters. If you have a game where something goes wrong, then I think that could be their Achilles heel. A team that has big people inside, really big, powerful players inside, I think is the best formula to give Gonzaga a problem. But I would put them as the national championship favorite. Michigan is number 2 and close, and Baylor also is very, very capable of beating those 2 teams. And I think that's the top 3, and then there's a drop off after those 3.
Well, I know one game that you were able to broadcast this year was Indiana-Illinois at Assembly Hall. That was one of the more ridiculous games of the college basketball season, with the amount of fouls and how long that game went. But I'm just curious overall with your impressions currently of the Indiana basketball program. I know you've called Archie Miller games in the past, and where you think they go from what's been an up and down season.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for Archie. I feel for those players because I think they're one of the teams that has sort of been, and it's unpredictable why this happens to some teams and not to others. Maybe Indiana's lost enough of those close games late. They've played a ton of close games. And, at some point, maybe that just starts to wear on you in this season. Like, man, are we going to miss the tournament and all this? We did all this and not go to the tournament. So you sort of have some sympathy where those doubts can creep in with a team where those late game situations aren't going well, because their season could be a lot different with just a few breaks, few plays made. I continue to believe, that Indiana and Archie kind of, when I talk to Archie, he doesn't totally agree with me, but I believe that Indiana just, it is really hard to succeed right now in the sport of basketball, college or NBA, without 3-point shooting. And Indiana, to me, just has built a roster where, and maybe part of this is players who haven't developed that shot the way that everybody thought they would, or haven't made them consistently enough this season. But it's hard to play teams and beat them with just twos. And I think that, most nights that's what Indiana is trying to do. And Indiana, even some of their best wins have come without a lot of contribution from the outside. And so, look, Indiana's scrappy. They play hard. DeRayce Thompson's had a really nice year. Jackson Davis obviously has had a terrific year. Those are two really good interior players. For the most part, they play defense. I like a lot of the things that Indiana does, but to me, it's really hard to be a complete team, a consistent high-level team without more perimeter punch. And, that's what Indiana looks to me like they're lacking the most.
That's certainly a great point. I want to ask you, because you called the IU Florida State game last year, which might have been the loudest game at Assembly Hall last year. And I know you've talked about how loud Assembly Hall can get. Is that the loudest arena you've ever broadcasted a game in?
Yeah, I think there are a few. I would say the four that come to mind are Assembly Hall, and then Mackey. I mean, two in the state of Indiana, and part of it with Purdue. The Purdue fans are great, just like Indiana fans are great. But that metal roof or whatever it is does make the sound sort of reverberate through when you go do a game at Purdue. And then Gonzaga when it's rocking, and Fog Allen at Kansas. And to me, those are the four. There are others that can get loud and be great. In Cameron Indoor, if it's really rocking, gets loud. And, back in the old days, McHale in Tucson was super, super loud. But if I rank them, those are the top four somewhere. But a really, really, really pumped up Indiana crowd might well be number one. There's really not much like it.
I'm curious, as a broadcaster, any things that you try to do or have to change when it is so ridiculously loud like that Florida State game last year?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, actually, when it's that loud, it's hard. It's hard to concentrate. I can't hear my partner very well. I can't hear myself very well at times. Mostly what I try to do is, if you have an atmosphere that great, you should already be defaulting to let the crowd tell the story. So a lot of times what I'll do is, give way more leeway after a made basket, maybe punch it with a good or a yes or something, but then just let the crowd tell the story and hope that my partner, whoever I'm working with, is alongside me in that. Because that, college basketball, that by far the thing that we miss the most this year is crowds, because that makes college sports. College sports, if you're comparing college basketball to the NBA, the level of play is not the same. So why would you watch college basketball? Because of the passion and the fans and the way the kids play and how hard they play and how much they care, and all that is so interwoven together. And we're missing that right now. So to me, when you're doing a college event especially, and the crowd is that good, that should be your broadcast partner. That should be the way you tell the story of the game, is by letting the crowd do it for you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was actually watching a little of the Butler-Villanova game yesterday on CBS. Was played at Hinkle Fieldhouse in Indianapolis. Actually had some fans, and they went to break just with the fan noise. And I had not heard that in a year, and I almost cried because it was just so nice to hear that again.
Yeah, a full house is great, but even some is better than none. And so you're right. Just a little sense of, oh, that's what it's supposed to be like. Now I remember. That's when the band is there and the students are cheering. That's what it feels like.
It's certainly what makes college sports great, as you said. I want to transition to baseball. As I mentioned, you've been with the San Francisco Giants since 2003. Called a lot of really memorable moments, but I imagine last season was certainly very different than anything you'd ever done before. What was that process like? Home games, road games, and broadcasting just a 60-game season instead of, one that's triple that length?
Yeah, there were some benefits to a 60-game season from my perspective, in that the Giants, the team that I broadcast for on a local level, probably weren't equipped last year to be a contending team over 162? Probably. Maybe they would have proved me wrong, but they were a contending team for a playoff spot all the way to the final game and the final inning of the final game. And so that made the season, it was the cliche was it's a sprint, not a marathon, but it's really true. And so it gave the season a different feeling. Would we want baseball to be that way every year? I would not. I mean, to me, the thing that makes baseball what it is the 6-month journey, the feeling that you have to outlast your competition, you have to be better than them, and then you have to last longer than them. That's a huge part of success in baseball. And the fact that it's there for you every day as a fan, as a listener, as a viewer, for 6 months out of the year. It's just a companion. It's a friend. And you don't have to be locked in on every pitch of every game. You can if you really want to, but you don't have to be a part of the season. And that's, to me, that's the biggest appeal of baseball. It's what I love about it. So I wouldn't want 60 games to be permanent, but it gave last season a different feeling. And for the Giants specifically, it was a good one. So I enjoyed it way more than I thought I would. Part of that was the Giants made it exciting. They were a fun team. They were a really scrappy team. They were in just about every game. They came from behind a bunch, which was fun. And they contended all the way down to the very last game. So I thought that was, it was way different and better than what I thought. We missed the fans. And I miss traveling and being in different ballparks in different cities for big games, Giants, Dodgers from LA, all that stuff. But, considering how the world was, especially last summer, I was thrilled and shocked at how much I enjoyed the 60-game season.
Now, you've been able to work with the legendary John Miller the last 17 years. What's that experience been like? What have you learned from him? And I don't know if you have any stories of just working with Miller.
Well, I grew up listening to John. So, I'm working with the person that really I learned baseball from and listened to and sort of was my model when I was a kid. I mean, much younger than you are. I was a 10-year-old riding in the station wagon to go see Orioles games and listening to John do the pregame show and the postgame show on the ride home and whatnot. So, it was funny when I first started. I was intimidated and I thought, oh my gosh, here I am working with the guy who's the voice of the whole sport and the best who's ever done it, or whatever was in my head at that point. It's been tremendous. It's been a great, I think early on, especially, I learned some specific things from John, and I continue to. One thing that John does better than anybody to me is he concentrates on that day's game and makes that day's game feel big and important. And we can be silly and laugh and tell stories, and in a blowout, we sort of lose our way. And, if the game's not going well and it's not an interesting game, maybe we veer off the tracks a little bit. But if it's a game that's fun and close, he just makes it feel like a big event. And the way he does that is by, baseball has a tendency, I think, when, a lot of my peers historically have turned a baseball broadcast almost into a talk show where, you got all this bio information and you're telling stories about people. And for a handful of broadcasters in history, that's been a winning formula. And it sounds great and they just have a knack for pulling it off. To me, for most, it's a way to make the game seem boring. And what John does is the game comes to life with John because he's describing details. He's taking you inside every pitch. He's telling you what the pitcher's thinking, what the hitter's thinking, who's good at what the strengths and weaknesses are of the players out there, what the strategy is, the rules, the nuances of the game. He puts you in the middle of the game in a way that makes it come to life. To me, the biographical stuff doesn't make the sport come to life. Like in small bits, it can make you care a little more about the players you're watching, and that's a good thing. You should always try to make the listeners care about what they're watching. But to me, the main part of the job is to make the game come to life for those viewers and listeners. And to me, that's what John does better than anybody, and probably better than anybody who's ever done it. And that's what I model after. I don't try to copy John, but my attitude towards an individual game is very much in line with how he wants to call a game.
You've, in your time with the Giants, along with John Miller, I mean, been a part of some remarkable moments, calling no-hitters, perfect game, 3 World Series. What's kind of your approach when you know you're going into a big game or when you're calling one of those really big moments?
I think actually the big games, big moments tend to be easier. As long as you're confident in what you're doing, and it's hard to do it for as long as I've done it and not at least have some confidence that you can pull it off. But the big games carry themselves. The big games and moments, you just don't have to do that much to enhance them. They're gonna create the drama and interest and excitement and fun for the viewer, listener on their own. And so to me, you just kind of get out of the way, make sure you're on top of things. There's definitely a different intensity level, concentration level for a super big game. And, maybe there's a different level of some preparation, some extra prep. Maybe. But mostly what I think it is that just be on time with your calls. Make sure you're not cluttering the broadcast in those big moments. Sort of clear the deck for the big moment to happen, and then you're going to sound good because you just can't help it. And it's the freeing part. It's in a funny way. I know you're just getting started in your career. The hardest parts of your career are now, and you're still a student, but when you graduate and move into the professional world, the hardest parts are going to be early. It's hard to make a minor league baseball game sound any good. It's hard to make a high school basketball game sound any good. It's hard to do a talk show like this, although you're doing a great job. I mean, it does sound like a professional show to me, but it's hard to make those things sound like they would if you were on a bigger platform. And that's the challenge when you're young, is to climb that ladder and get to those bigger events where you don't have to do a lot of the heavy lifting. I mean, I really believe that keep it simple when the game is big and the moment is big, and you're better off.
Well, I want to ask you on your expectations for the Giants this year. You mentioned last year pretty competitive, just narrowly missed the playoffs, going 29-31 in the 60-game season. What do you expect them to do this year, second season for Gabe Kapler as manager?
I think they'll be good. The problem is that they have the Dodgers and the Padres in their division. So the projection systems are really down on the Giants. And I think a big reason why is because of the competition level. I mean, they have to play 38 games head to head against those two teams. If you play your tail off in those 38 games, you could have a real hard time getting to 500. So that's a pretty good chunk of the schedule right there, where you're figuring you ain't going, even 28. You're not going 28-10. You know that. You're going to have to make up ground against some of those other teams. So, that I think puts a damper a little bit on what the Giants have done. I think they're going to score. No team is embracing, and no team maybe that I can remember is embracing platoons and mix and match more than these Giants are. I mean, when the Giants face a right-handed pitcher versus a left-handed pitcher, those are going to be almost two different teams. That's hard. It's hard to pull off with the way rosters are constructed, but it's going to look like two different teams. And to me, that's a pretty smart way to do it if you can pull it off. And so I think that's the idea for this year's Giants team, is to be really hard on opposing pitchers with matchups and always have somebody off the bench for a big spot. And Gabe Kapler, one thing that he did last year, first year with the Giants, was, man, he was super aggressive it could be the fourth inning. If it were a big at bat and the game were still close, he was making his move. The best right-handed hitter on the bench, if a lefty came in from the bullpen in a big spot, he was making his move early, and that's just the way it was. So to me, that was a big part of what the Giants' success was last year, and I expect that to continue. Do they have enough pitching to last 162? They really didn't have enough for 60 last year. They've gotten better. They've added some parts, but they got to get fortunate on the pitching front, but I think they'll score runs.
And in terms of the broadcasting side of things for games, are you expected to travel for road games? Is that uncertain? What's that going to look like this year?
It's uncertain. We're going to go to spring training. Two of my colleagues are already there. We'll sort of cycle through. So I'll go for a little bit, then they'll come back. We'll sort of ham and egg spring training. We're doing those games in person, but I think at least at the start, we're probably going to do what we did last year, work from our home ballpark, not travel, and kind of wait and see if we can get. I mean, my understanding is, and all this is just, it's so unusual to be talking to you. Here we are, March, and we don't know for sure, but we're still tiered. MLB, that's not a team thing. That's just an MLB thing where we are not in the tier with the players. So at the start, we can't go down to the clubhouse. We can't go on the field. We just have to be separated from them. So that certainly means we can't travel with them like we would ordinarily, which makes travel complicated. Are we going to, get on commercial flights? There's a night game and then a game the next day in another city. We're going to get up at 6 a.m. and fly on a commercial flight to the next stop because we can't fly after a night game as usual. Those are sort of like logistical things that make it a little more complicated. So I think the idea will be start slow and hope that as things get even better, it becomes easier for us to maybe do things more normally.
There was some recent baseball broadcasting news, and was curious on your perspective. The Toronto Blue Jays announced that they're not going to have a radio crew this year. They're going to simulcast their TV broadcast with Dan Schulman on the radio. Do you see that as the future? Is that beneficial for sports and broadcasting?
I don't think it's beneficial, but I do think that there's a strong chance that that happens more frequently. And that to me would be too bad, but especially for baseball, I can understand like maybe an NBA team doing that, even though there's some terrific NBA play-by-play voices on the radio who I think add to their franchises, add to their fan bases, help grow their teams locally. But the NBA on radio, NFL even, although NFL radio maybe 16 games that'll be preserved because everything's network on the television side. But for the NBA, I could see more and more of that happening. I think it already has happened, at least in a couple instances. For MLB, that would make me sad if that happens. But that said, I think it will happen. And for all of us who do this, the challenge is going to be, okay, if that's the case, then do the TV broadcasts have to really change? Is that going to, maybe it'll be subtle. Maybe it's something that most people wouldn't pick up on. But, Dan, for instance, to me, he's going to have to call the TV game a little differently than he would otherwise. A little more radio play-by-play on television. And hopefully that doesn't clutter up the telecast so much that it makes it hard to watch.
Certainly something interesting to follow in the field of broadcasting. Before I let you go, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your career. And you mentioned the career path, especially starting out, can be really challenging. You took maybe a little bit more of an unconventional path, starting at Stanford. You majored in the classics. Can you kind of just take us through your career path and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I did. I wanted to study what I wanted to study. Like, I didn't want to. Well, first of all, when I was your age, I had no clue this is what I would be doing, but mostly because it never really even occurred to me that it was possible. But I wanted to go to school and study what I was academically interested in without any regard to my career. Now, I guess I had the luxury of doing that. I was in a position where my family could afford to send me to college. There wasn't huge pressure on me, like to get a diploma and right away start paying my bills and somebody else's bills. Lots of young people are in different circumstances than I was. So I was fortunate in that way where I had a little more freedom maybe to just pursue what I was interested in. Didn't mean that I didn't want to get a job. It just meant that I didn't want to do pre-professional studying in college. I wanted to explore academically what I was interested in. And then whether it was go to law school or go get a job on Capitol Hill or go into sports broadcasting, I didn't know. But that was my choice for school. And I did the broadcasting stuff just purely as a hobby on the side. And I loved it so much when I was an upperclassman, maybe like junior going into senior year. I thought, I'm really going to regret this if I don't try. If I don't give it a chance to see where it takes me, I'll give it a couple of years. if I don't advance, if I'm terrible at it, if nobody likes the job that I'm doing, then okay, fine. I'll change course. But I got a job in minor league baseball after I graduated, and then quickly got another minor league baseball job to the AAA level with the Red Sox AAA team, the Paw Sox, at that point. And that was it was like an affirming thing for me. Okay, all right, 1 year in, I've made a jump. Somebody liked me. Maybe I can keep doing this. And I think it is hard for younger broadcasters to, if you don't get that push right away, if you don't get that affirmation of, yeah, you're on the right track, it can be hard to hang in there. And so I got that immediately. And then it was a lot easier from there, a lot easier psychologically, like, yeah, okay, I'm doing the right thing. This is what I should be doing.
You didn't mention much about the classics, but I was curious if you had maybe a favorite Greek god or Greek or Roman story.
My son, who is my youngest of my 3 kids, is 11 now, and he's just been totally transfixed by the Percy Jackson books, which weren't written when I was a kid, but are all about all the Greek gods. So we have been tossing around a lot of Greek mythology here in the house lately. I was partial to Homer. Like, I loved the Iliad and the Odyssey, and my classics degree at Stanford was in ancient Greek language. So I was a language major. We studied the ancient Greek language and read, a lot of the great works in the original, which was a super fun exercise. Not that easy, but a super fun exercise. And if you made me pick one story, the Odyssey is the story that I would pick. And the classics department asked me back a few years ago to do the commencement address for the graduating classics students, and I had this whole bit about how Homer was the first baseball broadcaster, and I was tongue in cheek, but there's a little element of truth to it. There is something about the Odyssey where you start at home like you do in baseball, and you're trying to get back home, and there are a lot of obstacles on the way, and it ain't that easy to do. And if you can get back home, you've accomplished something. And so I always thought, well, yeah, the Odyssey, maybe that's the first baseball broadcast in history.
So you really were studying your career path after all. I guess you just didn't realize.
I didn't know it then.
Come full circle. Well, just a couple more questions for you, Dave, before I let you go. One thing I was curious about, we've watched a lot of your baseball broadcasts, college football, college basketball. You've worked with so many different color analysts. And, when you're doing radio for the Giants, obviously, mostly working with John Miller, Kruk and Kipe sometimes, but more or less the same people. With ESPN, so many different personalities. How do you kind of build chemistry? And especially, when you're going from one person to the next on a week-to-week basis, how do you adapt?
Yeah, it's hard, but I would say the number one job for me is to be a listener. So when I am working with somebody, I really try hard. And this kind of goes back to you and I were talking a few minutes ago about my baseball philosophy and how I call a game, and John Miller and how he calls a game. To me, it's sort of tied into that, where my job as a play-by-play broadcaster is to describe the action and then listen to who I'm working with. So that's another reason why I don't like a ton of printed, I'm trying to pick up a piece of paper. I don't want to have a big cheat sheet jammed with info where I'm looking down and reading and concentrating and not listening to who I'm working with. I want to be listening. And I think if you're in my job and you're a good listener and can react when somebody says something interesting, can remember something, file it away in your brain for later in a game when you see a play that is like the one that your broadcast partner referenced in a specific way, and I'm able to bring that thought back in or prod that person again, I think that's good television, good broadcasting. So to me, that's my key is, different personalities need different things. So maybe my broadcast style changes a little bit from analyst to analyst, but mostly what I try to do is just listen, be a good listener, be actually paying attention to what that person is saying, so that I can make their broadcast better, and then I can help them show in the direction they want it to go.
Just a couple more questions for you. I know you're going to get this question a lot, but current college students, just broadcasters starting out, especially right now, it's a very challenging industry, challenging time. What would just be your big advice to them trying to make it as a sports broadcaster?
Okay, I have a couple pieces of advice. If you want to be a play-by-play broadcaster, number one, you got to find games to do. So you have to do a bunch of events to get better at it. You got to figure out a way to, whether it's whatever level, just get some reps in so you can get better. Then you have to always consider when you're sending tapes out or auditions out that people are making judgments on you in an instant. Brutally unfair, not fair at all, but it's better to know that reality. When you send a clip to somebody, email them a link or whatever, it's a lot different than when I was your age and having to figure out how to dub cassette tapes and whatever. But it is a little different. It's a little different, and it's a little easier to send a link. But the same reality holds true as it did back then, and that is when some executive for some team or radio station or TV station or whatever clicks that link, they are judging you in 10 seconds, say. I mean, literally. So you're agonizing over what the 8th minute of your resume reel looks like or sounds like. The first 30 seconds are how you're going to be judged. So have something that's really good, sounds good, crisp, good quality, crowd noise, hopefully a name or a team that somebody listening would recognize, just to help them sort of visualize. I mean, it's a lot easier if we're here at Assembly Hall, Hoosiers inbound the ball. Here's Jackson Davis, and he dunks it home. Even a non-basketball fan would at least have some image in their brain of what that looks like, so that they can sort of put your voice to an image. I think that's really helpful, as opposed to picking a minor league baseball game for an audition where the names mean nothing to the person who would be listening. That's hard. So, those are just a few little pieces of advice, like concrete stuff. Pay really good attention to those first few moments of your audition when you send that out. And then, my other sort of general, broader advice is that it isn't going to be easy. This isn't glamorous. There's nothing about this that is glamorous until you get to a certain level. You're going to be underpaid. You're not going to be appreciated. You're probably not going to have a lot of viewers or listeners when you're young. That will chase a lot of your competition away. Like, if you have the resolve to say, I'm doing this and I'm sticking with it for a while, and even if I don't make the progress that I want right away, I'm not going to get frustrated by that. I'm going to stick to working hard at what I do. Then within a few years, a lot of the competition that you, like, say your graduating class that you came in with, competing for the same jobs, a lot of people are going to say, forget this, I'm moving on to something else. So just by being persistent, you win. It's not easy, and you have to know going in that I'm going to have to make some sacrifices on the other end. But I think, if you're good at it and know that you're good at it and keep plugging away, eventually you do make progress.
Great advice. So, last question for you. I love asking sports broadcasters and people that have worked in sports media just to tell a favorite story. Over 20 years for you now working in sports, a favorite story or game that you called, or maybe an interaction with a player.
Well, I have a lot of them. I have been doing it long enough to where I've had a lot of great games, a lot of wonderful moments. I'll tell one just that popped into my head when as soon as you were starting to ask that question, because I got asked about it recently somewhere else. 2012 World Series, and this is a good lesson about humility in this job and sort of doing the right thing. So the 2012 World Series, the Giants were playing the Tigers. We had won in 2010. This was an attempt to win a second world championship. It was game 4. The Giants were up 3-0. So it was a chance for a sweep. It was a great game, back and forth game. Posey hits a home run against Max Scherzer, who was pitching for the Tigers. Miguel Cabrera knocks in a run, ties the game. It goes to extra innings. So the way we plotted out in playoff games with the Giants, because all 4 of us are working radio broadcasts, network TV takes over. Instead of sending our TV announcers home, we want our TV announcers to be a part of it. So it's John, it's Dwayne, it's Mike, and it's me all doing the games together. It's crowded, it's weird, but our fans like it. They want to hear from all of us. And so we divide up the innings of the games, and John's still the lead voice on radio, no matter who's there. But the rest of us just sort of divide up the games. Anyway, so beforehand, we set a spreadsheet up, and the 10th inning is my inning. So the clinch game goes to the 10th inning, and the Giants are the road team, and they scratch across a run. Ryan Terrio gets a walk. Marco Scutero knocks him in, and the Giants go ahead. So we go to the commercial break. The Giants are 3 outs away from a World Series championship. And I turned to John and I said, John, because he had been doing network stuff in 2010. He had not done our local broadcasts at all in the 2010 World Series. Here he was doing our local broadcast. And I said, John, you're the voice of the Giants. You have been for way longer than I have been. Why don't maybe you should call the final out of the World Series win? And John didn't even hesitate. He just said, no, it's your inning. You do it. This is yours. And so I got to call the final out of the World Series, even though, John is in the Hall of Fame, was already in the Hall of Fame, has 40 years of experience on me. And I tell that story not, to say that I got to call the final out of a World Series, which I did and which I will always cherish, but just to say that, John, quote, did the right thing in that moment, gave me a moment that I'll never forget. And then 2 years later, John got to call the Giants final out of the World Series with Bumgarner against the Royals in Game 7, a thrilling game and an incredible World Series. And so, it all worked out that we both got to do it. But I give John credit for that. The status that he had, it was no decision for him to make. No, it's your inning. You do it.
That's an awesome story from a certainly memorable moment for many Giants fans. Dave, a real treat having you on today. Great advice, great stories. I really appreciate you coming on the Unpaid Interns podcast.
Next time, I'll even comb my hair. Sorry, I'm looking a little ragged this morning. Thanks, Griffin.
I appreciate it, Dave. That will do it for today's episode of Unpaid Interns. We will be back on Wednesday for another episode. As always, if you missed any of today's episode or any of our past episodes, you can check them out on the IU Sports Media YouTube or Twitter page, or you can listen to them wherever you get your podcasts. For Dave Flemming, I'm Griffin Epstein. Thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you again on Wednesday.